All right, it's getting on towards 11 o'clock. I don't want to deprive you of valuable content that I hope to share with you today. I imagine folks are going to kind of filter in. It's a more informal conference if you haven't been before. Admittedly, it's only my second time coming. But that was my experience last time. So let me introduce myself. I realize my name is not on the title slides, but that's fine. I'm a mere cipher. The ideas just kind of pass through me, and it's hard to take responsibility for any of them. In fact, I now disclaim all responsibility. Thank you. I do want to remind everyone first that the room is mic'd, as I am mic'd. So if your feelings that we live in a culture of total surveillance weren't already kind of hyped up, guess what? Even here in a learning environment where we should have at least some degree of privacy in our own minds, you'll have to keep those thoughts to yourself unless you want them recorded for perpetuity. So, my name is Aaron Kirshenfeld. I am the Digital Initiatives Law Librarian at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hills, Catherine R. Everett Law Library. That all didn't fit on my badge, sadly. I'm also a clinical assistant professor of law, so I teach advanced legal research. What that means, what my job title means, is that I work in our technical services or collection services department. I manage our institutional repository, which is a bpress digital commons repository, which is what we're going to be talking about, or at least that's the platform that was used for this project. I manage our efforts in digital collections, often working with teams of librarians to put that together. And I have some reference duties as well. I started as a reference librarian. I love doing my reference work, liaison with faculty members, and sit at the desk, just like it is. So some ground rules, just so everyone feels comfortable for today. I don't mind being interrupted if it's a key point that you have a question about, but I'm going to talk for probably 45, 50 minutes, and then have some time at the end dedicated to questions. If no one has questions, I'll just force you to look at spreadsheets, which is what I would rather do. No. I like questions, and this is a fun thing to talk about. So this is the result. This talk is a result of about a year-long, a little bit more than a year-long project, lots of stops and starts to make available student notes, not always student notes, but note content from the North Carolina Law Review on our bpress digital commons repository. So, show of hands, in law school, did anyone write a student note? Okay, a couple, a few. Was it a fun process? No. May I pick on you? You said it was not fun. Were you careful in every assertion you made?
Well, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, I really love to write. It was just not fun. My problem was really our advisor. She decided I was definitely going to be preempted.
Okay.
As apparently an oracle that she is, she knew I would definitely be preempted. So I just switched my topic to something I really didn't care about. So it became a really boring note. But
it became really boring. How did you go about citing sources? You were a student, so did you feel kind of cavalier about the citations that you could include?
I felt extremely cautious.
Extremely cautious?
Yeah.
And you were careful?
Yeah,
and thoughtful? Right. Students are awesome.
I'm much more careful than any of the notes or articles I had to edit, or that I edit now for.
Yes, not to single anyone out, I also believe that I'm an above average, detail-oriented, and careful site checker and assertion maker. So one of the things that's really unique about student notes is that they're often very carefully put together, carefully cited, heavily cited. These are really rich documents. And they're rich documents that, for some reasons, some that I can speculate about, have been ignored or less ignored less love given to them in terms of their value. Certainly they don't have the same degree of value as citations, but they have value in that they can be read, they're often explanatory, and they're often carefully put together. So let me tell you a little bit about our project in particular. Well, who works at an institution that has an IR? Okay, a B Press Digital Commons IR? Okay, all right, so a lot. Great. We started our institutional repository a little less than 3 years ago. Actually, first uploads went up in January of 2016. And the idea behind having the repository was to do a few things. One, to capture things that would be unique to our institution. Okay, right, sounds good. A lot of institutions do historical materials, things about the school, unique materials that would be useful to our patrons. With a repository, right, it can be an open web repository like this. It can be anyone. But we are more interested in putting things up there that are relevant to, hope that's okay, that are relevant to attorneys in North Carolina, to the people of North Carolina, to people interested in the law of North Carolina, to our faculty, students, members of the public. So we were looking for unique materials that fit with our patrons' needs, that were in some way calling out for an increased degree of both access and preservation, and perhaps that had something to do with our unique institutional history. Those were our guidelines, more or less. And in thinking about those, one thing I wanted to do was make sure that we could complete projects, not have projects that stretched out forever, but we could have things that went up, that would have a finite endpoint, and that also would not cost a lot of time, effort, and money. Because I figured this was a good way to make myself popular, have successful projects that nobody had to do anything with and no one had to pay for, except for the repository, which is a separate issue. So for reasons that I'll get to, focusing on these student notes and comments fit all of these criteria, right? They were reasonably unique or hard to access. They were institutionally significant. They came from the North Carolina Law Review, the flagship law journal of the institution. And oftentimes, the subject of these student notes, especially the earlier student notes, they were just kind of analytical or explanatory about North Carolina primary law and developments in the law. If they were an actual case note, right, the law from the last year or so, statutory notes, similar. And I had a little soft spot for them, too. I never wrote a note. I was never on a journal in law school. But I think something that we should do as librarians is pay attention to the old and the unloved. Not everything that we put in our collections has to be something that's commercially viable or metrically popular. Certainly, these types of notes and the way that they're described, as I'll tell you about, they have no commercial value, or at least not yet, because none of the vendors have really bothered to describe any of these in any detail, nor the third-party indexers or anything like that. We'll get there. So, a lot of people who are not, over the age of 80 don't know that law journal notes and comments were not always such a formalized practice with this extensive preemption checking and heavy oversight. There weren't that many of them in the early days. And North Carolina Law Review started in the early 1920s. From issue 5, they were consistently publishing notes. Those notes were not always written by students. Sometimes they were written by practitioners, judges, lawyers, things like that, writing about the law that they knew very well. And I've kind of figured out that before 1980, this was how it worked. You would have notes that were shorter, explanatory. They were not attempting necessarily to prove or disprove a thesis or state a theory of law. They were explanatory. So we started looking at notes from the 20s through basically 1980 and realized that there was no unique metadata for the individual notes or comments that were in there. So this is the North Carolina Law Review, the entire run. You can see, actually, it's always very fun to look at the history of both institutions and legal practice. Up to about here is the first like 50 years, and the rest is, or rather 70 years, and the rest is just, the last 30 years. So we've had a lot of, law review's gotten a lot bigger. There's a lot more of it. So we're mostly focused in that first half of the range there. So yeah, let me show you what this looks like in Hein. This is, I believe this is from, this is from 1969 or 1966. Okay, yes. This is what you get, and if everyone, I hope everyone can see it. I made it pretty big. This is what you get when you see the contents of the journal in Hein. You see that you've got articles that are described, they have titles, authors, all that. And then here on page 166, you have a document called Notes and Comments. The next document you'll see starts on page 318. So from 166 to 318, you have something known as Notes and Comments. And I'll tell you later if any of you have these things lurking in your journals too, because I've researched that. I'll put you all on the spot. No. So yeah, all right. Not great at math, but that's like 150 pages of stuff. I'm getting nods. Yes, I got it close. Good. All right, cool. Let's make it available. And that's what we did. So, any questions at this point? All right. Let's talk about how we went about making these reference-rich, carefully prepared, and yet old and unloved student notes available to the people that may be interested in them. All right. This is a screenshot of a personal GitHub page. When I started working in as the Digital Initiatives Law Librarian, I had no ability to write any code. I still have no ability to write any code that you would want to use, but I can write scripts that are simple enough to kind of do a little more complicated than find and replace stuff using regular expressions or other ways of figuring out where to put the pointers and stuff. So when we purchased our back file from Hein to put on the repository, we got PDFs, right? And we got a comma-separated value sheet. Is this something familiar to anybody? Okay, yeah, all right. That CSV is really fun because all the titles have they're in the convention of with the article at the end, right? Comma, space, article at the end, and at least for some law reviews. I realize not all were like this. And yeah, we had to figure out how to transform this file into the form that Digital Commons needed in order to complete the batch uploads. And I'm looking at like 5,000 files here, and like I don't want to do this by hand, so I better teach myself how to code. So I did that. That was pretty fun. and my bosses are really nice and let me do that for a while. So yeah, while we were going through it, I believe I got a call on the reference desk from someone looking for a citation. And it was in volume 46 of the North Carolina Law Review. It was by a judge, and the person said, well, this citation doesn't exist, it's wrong. I said, what? We've put everything on the repository. This is about a year in. It should be up there. We've put everything up there. I sat there and I wrote this code. It did a great job. I was very careful, a lot of checking. She said, no, it's not up there. I said, okay. And I went to the page, and sure enough, the article that she was looking for was not up there because it was one of these notes and comments. I said, oh, S. Except I didn't say S. I'm trying not to introduce any bad language onto the internet in this talk. Oh man, I didn't know. So that was what I would like to call recognition of the problem. And I think I went to my boss's office and I said, oh, S. Would you look at this? And my boss, in fact, is nodding. I did do that. And she said, great, fix it. I said, great, let's figure it out. So we had some fits and starts, but basically I was able to kind of build off of the code that I had used for putting the initial upload together to figure out which of these documents. They're not all named notes and comments, unfortunately. Some are named notes. Some are named editorial board comments because the editorial board used to come in the middle of the issue. So I had to figure out, what were the names of these things. Actually look at the data before writing the code, which is always a good idea. I've done it both ways, so try not to do it backwards. And yeah, I figured out there wasn't a technical fix for this. Do you know why? Because no one had created this metadata ever. Right? So we were going to have to do it by hand. And then I got a student worker. And I would never want one again. No. We had a student working on this kind of part-time. I'll admit I was loosely managing this process, and it didn't go great. So this was to look at the documents and to hand key the title information, and I'll show you one of these sheets, title, author, and other kind of basic metadata that Digital Commons was going to need and that was going to be useful. We didn't bother with subject metadata or anything like that. Quality was not great, so I said, okay. And at that time, we had some time open up in the schedule of one of our newer reference librarians, and I said, great. How about we get her to work on this? And she did an excellent job keying all the things in. So that was the first fit and start, and how we began organizing the work. Identified the documents, did the data cleaning, organized the work. I ran some basic tests to make sure this was going to look right on Digital Commons, and all of that. So who wants to be supervised by me now? This is a piece of paper. I find that paper is often a very good organizational tool where you print it out and you give it to the person and then you can see what they've done. So these are all the files that I identified, printed out, and this is Allison's work. Allison Simulevich, our reference librarian. She went through each one of these and crossed it off and then handed me the sheet back so I knew that it was done and that I could check it over. And that was great. And here's what she was filling out. This is just a sample of the first, I believe this field goes to AF, which I always like, Excel AF, if anyone's familiar with the internet slang. So yeah, basically I created these template sheets that would have some of the fields filled in, so she didn't have to do that, that it was replicable rather easy. You can't see my, let's just say, meticulous naming convention for the documents, but they would have the, I have a pointer on this one. Yeah, there, okay. So it would have volume name, issue number, and then this very standard string separated by underscores for each of these, because ultimately when I was uploading this stuff, it made the checking a lot easier, and I was able to automate a lot of the link creation for the uploads, which was very helpful. It's good to have clean data. It really is. So yeah, our reference librarian did the metadata entry, and then, oh yes, and here she is. This is not an actual image of her doing the metadata entry. It's a staged photograph for the purposes of this presentation. I would not want to tell you any lies. But you'll notice, here's another copy of the entire set of the North Carolina Law Review in her office that she was using. I forgot something, actually. At one point, we were using the, to identify the actual, to try to speed things up, to identify the actual metadata without having to flip through the files. We were using some of the table of contents pages that were bound up in the journals. But for about 20 years or so, whoever was doing the binding was just cutting out those table of contents pages. So I remember digging through some boxes that we had donated to us and pulling out individual issues and handing them up to Allison, going from our first floor to our fourth floor, all the while, doing the rest of my job. That was a fun time. Wouldn't recommend that. So yes, here she is. She was checking against the actual print stuff. We actually identified some places where the digitization had not been perfect, where there were pages in the print that were not in the digital files. There's a lot of care for these things. But we had another problem. All right. I don't know if you can see this, but this is from a 1950 page. I chose a provocative one here, criminal law, transportation of alcoholic beverages. And you'll notice that these case notes, if you ever looked at them, they often have a very standardized way of expressing the title, right? Which does not look unlike what a headings system looks like in case note or in case law publishing. So it would give the name of the law or the name of the area of law, criminal law, bailment, real property. It actually makes it very easy to search by subject in the title itself, which is why these things are so rich, or one of the reasons why. But what you'll see here is that criminal law, transportation of alcoholic beverages, starts in the middle of a page. Oh, man, this was a bummer. I knew this was going to be a problem for some of the earlier ones, and then I kind of figured that, like the rest of law review articles, they would all start either on a recto or a verso, right at the top of the page. Not the case. Notes and comments really is the document, and the individual notes within the document just kind of start wherever. Sometimes we would get lucky and they would come at a page break. Sometimes they wouldn't. I invite you all to look in your repositories or in Hein to see if this problem ever presents itself. It does, a lot. And I was like, well, half-assing this, oh shit. That was two. We're not going to do an insufficient job when we have the opportunity to do a great job. So I got a student worker again to split the PDFs. All right, this was mindless, rote labor that was undertaken in good cheer, in good spirit, and under careful and close supervision by the Digital Initiatives Law Librarian. We came up with, I was able to give him lists to know where all the page breaks were so he could double check everything. And in every set of documents that I've QA'd so far, I've done a quality assurance check, meaning looked at it and compared it to what it should be. I have not found any problems yet, but I'm sure that the internet will do that for me, which is great because then I can go fix it. No problem. So yeah, this is what it looked like. We basically figured out that you would just have to copy the page, right, and then split the PDFs. The PDF splitting was not as hard as it could have been, but harder than it should be. Does anyone have, so we have Acrobat Pro. Does anyone have experience with Acrobat Pro? Yeah, it's not really easy to like write some scripts and then have them do stuff in Acrobat Pro. You can put together little macros and stuff like that. But basically it was easier to create top-level bookmarks in the PDF file and then run split from the Organized Pages tool. It splits out into documents that can be labeled by number. If the naming convention was correct, which I made sure it was, then all those files are going to have predictable names. If they have predictable names, you can put them at predictable URLs. If they have predictable URLs, you can automate it. Do that. So yeah, after that, then I was left with thousands and thousands of PDF files, actually 1,717 PDF files, and individual metadata sheets for each issue. And then I waited. No, I waited because I didn't feel like doing it. I was busy with other things. And actually, this process, let me tell you a little bit about the timeline. We got the reference librarian's time in June 2017. Okay, that's where I kind of fixed the real beginning of this project, although the identification of the problem was like 6 months earlier. The entry of the metadata was ongoing from about June to December 2017, so 7 months, 6 or 7 months. The splitting kind of started when the academic year started, so August, September, right, and carried through till the end of the semester. So both processes were kind of going on parallel tracks at similar times. The metadata entry started a little bit earlier. In December 2017, I provided an update to our reference librarians about what we were doing, and also with the North Carolina Law Review staff, who I thought would be curious to know that we were expanding access to a lot of their old stuff. And they were very appreciative, actually. It was a really good bargaining chip for me, where now they are very prompt with giving me files when their new issues are published in forms that I can use. One could say that it was a quid pro quo. One could say that it was a veiled threat. One could say many things. No, I think it was actually part of the academic gift culture, a reciprocation, where they saw I had done a good faith effort for them. They wanted to do a good faith effort for me. So it's really strengthened our, or at least my relationship with the Law Review. So yeah, that was in December 2017, not that long ago, and I proposed this talk in, I guess, April, and I figured, I'd better finish it before giving the talk. So everything was completed in May 2018, which was at least 7 days ago, which actually is, so uploads were kind of staggered based around my teaching schedule and kind of other stuff. But yeah, basically when the semester would end, I would get a chance to upload a lot of documents. So it kind of messes with what we got from the metrics. So I'll show you a slide. This is not a good, this is not a particularly good demonstration. I'm going to end the slideshow and show it to you on the web. Here we go. Here's a nice example. This is what it ends up looking like on the Digital Commons repository, where you have these articles, and here's how it used to look, right? It said, oh, I need to fix that, law school, and then notes and comments, I left that document up there because it's a pain in the butt to return or to remove it, and also because more is better. But yeah, this is what it looks like now. Each one of these, here's transportation of alcoholic beverages. Each of these has metadata associated with it, giving the title, giving the author name, giving the recommended Blue Book citation, which you can do by creating a first page field, and the proper year from the data information. Not hard to find now, which is really good. Happy with that. Oh yeah, let me show you the file too. This is what these things look like. So yeah, Allison sat there and would just look for wherever the name was at the end of the note, and then know that that was the end of the note. And so it actually involves kind of pinging up and back and forth to go to the title and then down to the name to create one piece of metadata. This was very much aided by those contents pages, of course, when we had them available. When we didn't have them available, this was the process. Allison is really, she did a dutiful and good job, and that is a great thing. So yeah, this is what they look like, and this is what,
the
yeah.
page split, the PDF splitting, it says it's just white space, so the pagination is the
Nope.
same?
No,
That's what this one's doing.
yeah, so this is going to show you the this is going to show you a split one where these pages have been duplicated at 55. All right, so we put a mark at 55, right, a bookmark at the second 55, right? So it would split at the top there. So this will be the first page that you'll see in criminal law transportation of alcoholic beverages. This will be the last page you see in Edwin B. Robbins' earlier piece. And I can actually show that to you on the repository. Right, so let's give Edwin a download stat. Tench. Okay, hope that's right. Some of these names were quite interesting. And then we'll go to the one that's before it to show you how the page breaks there. It's going to be the declaratory dividend. So yeah, page down, and you'll see that that's the first page, right, of that one. And when this loads, it should be, I hope, the last page of that one. Okay, so yeah, the splitting was absolutely necessary to make sure that all the stuff got on there. All right, any questions about, yes?
Have you, it's funny, our law review is actually in the process of doing an amazing managing editor who just graduated. And it's like, so now that I'm graduated, can I add subject headings to our law review on your repository?
Yep.
Because he's amazing.
Okay.
Unusual. Have you considered working with the law review directly to give them any access to spreadsheets if they wanted to do something like that?
That is an excellent question because it allows me to brag. So what we were able to do is part of this new reciprocal process of us doing things for each other was the law review requested that the way that we had been tagging some documents in the repository, they wanted them tagged a different way. And I said, great, tell me how you want them tagged. Let me send you the spreadsheets. And they hired a student worker on their own, went through, corrected some of the metadata that they wanted corrected, and then gave it back to me. It was awesome. That problem was fixed. It concerned the switch from these notes to what they started calling recent developments, which is what they call their notes now. But yeah, thank you. All right. I thought you were going to ask about metrics. It's my favorite topic. All right. Let's go through these again. All right. Oh, Allison, still there. So here's a metric. This is a tweet from one of our faculty members, Carissa Hessick, who's actually written about the use of Twitter in academic legal discourse, so meta. Here she is, unprompted by me, believe it or not, on May 31st, right before this talk. This is actually true. She was reading a student note from 1931 in Harvard Law Review. And I said, well, that's cool. We should tell her that we just put 1,700 undescribed student notes up on our repository if she wants to do some research about how those issues were handled in our state. So someone used it, or someone is using student notes. And again, I imagine the audience for these things is academics, folks who are interested in looking at the development of law over time. But for some areas of law, a student note that was written in 1955 is still pretty good. It's the explanatory material that you have as to why a certain statutory section got written or to how a certain doctrine got developed. And now it's free on the internet for anyone to look at. But you say, okay, it's anecdotal. What about the usage metrics? I love the SpongeBob meme, man. I can't. I had to have a student explain to me SpongeBob because I'm not of that generation. But apparently, when he is kneeling down like this, he's mocking us. Because what are the usage metrics for these things? How could this possibly be something that people want access to? Right? These are student notes from the 1930s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and the very beginning of the 80s. Who could possibly want this stuff? A lot of people, it turns out. So here's the number I want to focus on. 472 in the period since September 1st through May 31st. Okay? So that's a 10-month period. Documents that were named notes and comments, editorial board comments, okay, the old names. Those were downloaded 472 times, okay? Now, presumably, that's the same content, right, but not as well described, okay? You can access the article just fine. It's in the PDF, right, but the metadata is not exposed. So, of the new uploads, okay, and this was about half of the new uploads because I didn't finish this until a couple days ago, 8,000 downloads. That's only a 1,600% increase in use, which I call a real win. Yeah, that's a lot of percentage. I had to do the math myself. It was really complicated. So yeah, people are actually accessing this content because it's well described, right? Because the subject happens to be in the title, which is great. But as the proportion of documents shows, these new documents are 31% of the total corpus in the law review, and yet make up only 6% of the usage so far. I expect that that'll even out over time as there are more downloads, but they're kind of essentially less important articles, so I don't expect them to get the same amount of download use. Let me tell you a little bit about some qualitative things, because I have those too. We've done anecdotal, quantitative, and now qualitative. I picked some of the notes that were getting used a lot and tried to control for when they had been uploaded. Control Z, the most important keystroke. Nope. Control Z. Escape. Yes. So, I'll be honest with you. I wonder sometimes, who's looking at these things? Okay? And why are they looking at them? we just heard a talk about freeing the law, and part of the justification for this project is that we're freeing some analytical material about the law, essentially some more secondary source material about the law. Well, I'm not sure that you should rely on a 1966 student note about police interrogation and the privilege against self-incrimination, okay? I don't have qualms about it being up there, even though this is not legal advice, but these things are pretty keyed into the Google algorithms. They get surfaced a lot. The definition of burglary in North Carolina has not changed, really. This was when we got rid of the nighttime requirement, the breaking, the entering, the at night, dwelling house. And actually the spite fences article is quite good too. States the law pretty adequately. Can you all see this? I guess you can see it well enough. But I do wonder, this actually describes distribution on dissent, right? It's not wrong. It's not legal advice, but it is helpful, right? And you can see that. Looking at these has been fascinating so far. Still a little too early to kind of draw any super meaningful conclusions from that. So let me tell you a little bit about you repository folks, and your institutions. I've looked at other institutions. Basically, the count that I used for this was 75 bpress Digital Commons institutional repositories. Okay, I think that's what we're up to, and when I got started on this, it was 60. So law schools are, at least finding these things more useful, or at least getting them started. Most of them contain journals. Fewer of them contain the full back file of those journals. I'm making smaller and smaller baskets here. And even fewer of those had the law review begin before 1950, which is where I kind of figured that this problem was going to show up the most. And results are mixed. I looked at, I think, 10 institutions plus ours. If you count ours, 5 out of those 11 had a similar structure where there were just big chunk documents that were either called student note or case note or notes and comments. So 4 out of 10 of the other institutions, 5 out of 11 with ours. It's not every institution, but it's a lot, and it's enough. And from what I can tell, the institutions that have individually named, individually described notes and comments, they don't have them based on effort, but they have them because they were indexed that way, either by whoever is doing the third-party indexing. So I need to follow up with Hein, folks from Hein. If anyone from Hein is here, I'd like to talk to you, to figure out how, when these digitization efforts started, how when these back files started getting uploaded, what the procedure was for dealing with indexing these notes and comments. So yeah, they're out there. And you too could have a low-cost, successful project at your law school to surface thousands of new articles for people to use. And who says that you don't learn anything at these conferences? So, a couple other things that I want to look into. One, I got to figure out what accounts for the difference in the way these things were indexed. I don't know. I'm checking. If you know, tell me. If you know and are writing an article, tell me that too. And I'll collaborate. But yeah, I was looking, right now our access to the print index legal periodicals, index to legal periodicals, is being hampered by an asbestos abatement. So I have not gotten a chance to look back to see how it was done, how the print indexing of these student notes happened, but perhaps there's an answer there. I have many questions. So yes, but basically how we're going to account for the differences that I'm seeing between institutions. Obviously, continuing to look into the use of these notes, how they're being used, and hopefully I can wrap that up into something that will be written. But I think also part of this is promoting potential uses for this new data set. Okay, we do this all the time, right? We purchase a new product, we send a message to our faculty, hey, we got this new thing. Would you be interested in using it? Some go so far as say, hey, this could be a possible use for this. I think it's going to be incumbent on me and perhaps on others in our library and perhaps on other librarians to talk about what uses these data sets can have. I saw an article published a few years ago about the differences in the gender of the authors of student notes in the last 10 years. I wonder if the gender of the law school populations over time match with the representation of students who wrote notes. I think that would be a really interesting study to look at, and there's some interesting methodology on that. I'd be curious to see if there was a way to design something that could show how much of this actually represents law that is still useful to folks who are looking at it. So I'm sure there are many other questions for other researchers to deal with. I think that's one of the beauties of being a librarian, is that you can just propose the topic and other people will work on it. So I'm going to wrap up my prepared remarks by saying we went from 188 chunked together documents to 1,717 separated documents that were separately described. I think they're getting used a lot more than the old ones. It really wasn't that hard to do it. It took some time and some elbow grease and some attention to detail, but a lot of it can be automated. Obviously not the individual keying of the metadata, but that's what we have humans for. That's not what we have humans for. I don't think we should. I take that back. And you can get fun things like big deal faculty members at your institution writing interesting and nice things about you. So that is where I will stop for today. I will take questions. If not, you'll be forced to look at the spreadsheet. I will do it too. Yes?
Did you say your back issues from Hein?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
We're actually thinking of doing that. We're hoping to start uploading things this fall.
Okay. I have some advice.
Okay.
And I don't know if the practice has changed, but basically what we received, and it seemed like there were some nods around the room, was files, right? PDF files, the way that they are on Hein Online, and corresponding metadata that does not link up very well with what you're going to need to do to put it on Digital Commons. So I have to look over those scripts again because I don't know if they're any good or for anyone to use, and they're not particularly inventive, but basically you'll be doing a lot of finding and replacing. But I would check to see whether or not this issue is something that you would identify. Ask the representatives at Hein if this is something that they know about. I don't think they'll create the metadata for you, but it's something to do. Always work at the repository, as they say.
And just to add
Yeah.
to that, I don't know if this is still accurate advice because this was several years ago that I did this. The file names that Hein had a lot of the metadata pieces that you needed in the spreadsheet. So I was working on a Mac, so I used Automator to run something through there and generate a spreadsheet for me that had a row for
Yep.
each file, and then he broke up. And then I still had to do some find and replace
Yeah.
in the spreadsheet to get it looking the way that it should, but
Yeah.
the
Well, this
file
was-
name had those pieces.
Yeah, it was particularly helpful for generating the citation. You could pull out the volume number, the first page number, and that's all part of using those file names to split it out and generate those more easily, right? You would want to separate all the fields that need to be separated, right? The volume, the first page number, the center thing, and getting the year right is important too. Hey.
Two weird questions.
Yes.
One is, were there any copyright concerns about the students' comments? I presume they had standard release.
No.
Have you done a,
No.
there were no, wasn't, okay.
Nope.
So which goes to my second question. Have there been any complaints?
Good question. Nope. Not yet. But I'm ready for them. So the next step is coming up with a procedure for takedown. Because, I imagine the thing that you wrote when you were 24 or 25, and you're now a federal judge, which, if you look at this, at least one of them is a retired federal circuit judge, David is it Sentinel? Okay. He wrote one of these in 1966. Does he want that floating around on the internet? What did he write about? Real property, landlord and tenant, lessee's liability for sublessee's negligence. I don't know. If he gets in touch with me, I'm sure as hell going to take it down. But we're going to come up with a standard process for getting that done sometime soon. Because, it's a concern. I tend to be of the opinion that in terms of mitigating our risk, at least for the type of institution that we are, is that if we comply with a request to take something down, that will be the end of it. I feel pretty confident with that.
I'm not the person who makes the decision about this, so take this.
I'm also not the person. I disclaimed all responsibility before the talk. Don't you remember?
But I think
That
that
always works.
we don't consider this any sort of copyright issue because we're considering ourselves just the official publisher of, like, it's exactly the same. Like, this is just where the law review publishes their stuff. So if you submitted it to the law review for publication and it came out in print, this is now the online version. They're the publishers. It's not the library because it's the institutional source. So that's how we interpret it. It's just, because our law review is sending us the files. We have that already. This is just their tool that they're using, rather than this is like the library republishing something. So we just don't view it as a separate institution.
We bought the right to republish the back file.
Right, exactly. We're getting it. And as far as the scanned digital one, sourced through a legal process.
Yes.
I was just looking at Richmond's digital commons presence with the law review, and we were fortunate from my quick look in that, at least into the 70s, our notes and comments are indeed itemized and separated out. But I don't know, I've been involved in that process, but not that particular move, so I don't know whether that involved work on our part or whether we were lucky with our Hein content. But what I wanted to ask about was the one bit of metadata that would seem perhaps useful in these note and comment kinds of things would be, especially in the instance of case notes, the case name, so that somebody who had a particular interest in why be stickling or whatever it might be, would maybe get a better foothold on them. Do you sort of figure that Digital Commons' own searchability is an adequate substitute for that, or was that something you might have liked to have done?
I think that, thank you. I think that Digital Commons search capability is not an effective way to do that. But I imagine that there are vendors at this conference, perhaps even in this room, that would like to look at the freely provided information that is on our repository, the notes that we have split up and described for them, and go pull out the citations that are in them and put them in a data set of their own that they can sell back to us. Or we can do it, either or. Yeah, I think that's part of the beauty of exposing more metadata, right? Now we've called attention to this content. Maybe you get lucky and maybe the case name is in the actual title of the note. But yeah, that sounds like a great add-on application to this. Yes?
Have you only put in your digital repository the just the articles from the North Carolina Law Review, or have you also added articles written by your faculty that have been published in other law reviews?
Yeah.
In the actual version, or is it like a preprint, or?
It is a post-print. It's a term I made up. No.
People who aren't me are spending a lot of time freaking out about that.
I am very lucky to have an institution that is not freaking out about this. I fully acknowledge that. So we purchased the back file to the 5 journals that are published at our school. They are not published by our school. They're the property of those law reviews or law journals. And we have started putting faculty scholarship online too. Mostly retrospectively at this point. And we maintain an internal database, of course, of the faculty scholarship that populates our faculty profile pages. But in this sense, we were adding publications retrospectively, and we had an internal process for determining the risk of publishing or posting certain articles, and we followed that process. I can be vague about that. Yeah, please.
Done some of these. Do you find the footnotes after the last page?
I hope not. Does this happen? Oh no. Yeah, I have to go back and do it all again. No, you didn't ask. No. So one advantage of keeping the full file up there is that you can always access the big chunk together file, right? One of the ways that you can access free North Carolina case law, perhaps you remember this, is the Administrative Office of the Courts in North Carolina has chosen to digitize and publish every volume of the North Carolina reports and North Carolina appellate reports. Unfortunately, they published those volumes in single PDF files of thousands and thousands of pages that make it impossible to read. Actually, not impossible, just inconvenient to read. It's possible, okay? It's possible to go page down to the place where you need to go. So aside from it being difficult to remove these things from the repository, the big chunk together files, they do serve as that kind of backstop or backup. And of course, we've archived all the files and can resplit anything that is necessary and re-upload if there's need for it, right? But yeah, I imagine there'll be problems. It's okay. I'll fix them, and then I'll still have a job. All right. Well, we are at the time. If anyone has any additional questions, feel free to contact me. I'm not that hard to find, but thank you.